Good evening, good evening, good evening. As always, coming to you live and live and in color. Looking forward to a wonderful conversation tonight. Listen, I try not to like say things religiously, like you just always say stuff just to be saying it. But I actually mean it when I say it. That I'm really looking forward to tonight's conversation because, and maybe that's just the nature of the podcast. I'm always wanting to have these conversations that we don't have in the church and in other environments. And so I'm really happy to have a guest tonight that's going to be able to share a perspective that I think is immensely valuable. Even as an LGBT person, as a gay man, there's a part of the LGBTQ plus experience that I don't understand, that I know about intellectually, but it hasn't been my walk. It hasn't been my journey. And so I think it's important that we not always tell the story of people who have their own stories, because we're giving it from an outside looking in, even when we're all under the same cultural umbrella of LGBTQ plus. And so I'm glad tonight and honored tonight to have a guest who is a trans person who is able to share from his own journey, from his own experience, that trans journey. And so tonight's episode is Being Trans, a Personal Journey. So my guest is Sam Castle. Sam Castle is a certified, losing my notes here. Sam Castle is a certified trauma-informed coach and is also the founder of the Do You coaching, where his mantra is, you don't need permission to be who you are. A transgender man, Sam is a life coach, a podcaster, and an advocate for self-acceptance with over 13 years of experience in mental health. He empowers clients through trauma healing, focusing on freedom, faith, and empowerment. Sam plans to pursue his master's degree in social work in 2025 in order to further deepen his impact. In addition to coaching, though, Sam also hosts the Be You, Do You podcast, which celebrates self-expression and authenticity. And yours truly was honored to be a guest on that podcast. So make sure that you check that out. Be You, Do You podcast. We'll make sure to let Sam, have Sam give you all the info on how to connect and follow his podcast as well. So at this time, it is my pleasure and it is my honor to welcome to Faith Evolution, Sam Castle. Welcome, Sam. How are you this evening? I brought you on and didn't bring you on. Okay, I was in full screen mode.
Thank you so much for that amazing intro. I'm doing good, grateful, thankful to be here and be here on the guest to share my experience and try to help as many people as I can out there.
Awesome. I'm so grateful to you because a lot of times nobody is like required to share their journey, right? But yet there are so many people who could be helped by it. I talk, even as a spiritual leader, I talk a lot about telling people, share your testimony, because you never know who else needs to hear that, to save them some tears, to save them some of that struggle. It'll be a struggle. It'll be a journey for everybody. But if we can, help it to not be at a level 10 by bringing it down to a level 6, by bringing it down to a level 3, because our experience was able to be a help, why not help? And so thank you so much for coming on and being able to share your story. So I kind of shared like your official information, but tell the audience just your personal, who is Sam?
Who is Sam? I'm a husband. I'm a son. I'm a fur dad to two wonderful, amazing pups who have helped me actually immensely on this journey. They've been huge emotional support. My wife has been amazing. I'm also a life coach, passionate about mental health and advocacy, specifically working with marginalized and underserved communities. I feel like that's my passion, that's my purpose, and why I'm here on this earth.
Awesome. And I think that to me is like, even as I was reading your bio, I was like, just knowing your journey is like such a perfect thing to go into, because you've been in places where you can really help experientially, something that you couldn't get from a book in school, but just drawing from your own journey. So thank you for doing that work as well.
Thank you. Yeah. And that's how I, not fell into it. I feel like it's always been my calling, but I was running away from it because I always question, like, who am I to help so many people? But like you said, it's through my own lived experience where I'm able to help individuals cut down that learning curve, and even also, support and help them even go on their own learning journey, so yeah, I'm just happy to be here and happy to get into my journey and talk a little bit more about it and how it started and where I'm at now.
Hey, that was a perfect segue. So let's go ahead and get into it. So let's go back to the beginning because, well, but before we do that, I do have one more question.
Yeah.
Like introductory, if you will, because even though you, many people who are watching, not all, but many people who are watching are part of the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
And yet, I think that we have lived long enough to know that not everybody, even in the LGBTQ plus community, knows what it actually means to be trans. So to just make sure that we're having the same conversation as people are listening, could you take a moment and just define that for us? What does it mean to be trans?
So I identify as a transmasculine male. That means that I was biologically assigned female at birth. That was my assigned sex at birth. I don't align with the sex that I was born at birth, and I transitioned to more of what I identify now is as a man. So I'm living my life as a man, but prior to that, I was biologically born female.
Okay, and I think that word, because we use it in so many different ways. There's even a Catholic doctrine called transubstantiation that talks about how the body and the blood, being the wine and the juice, but it has transubstantiated. The substance has moved from what it is across into being something else. And so that whole trans thing of that transition, a movement from one to the other, I think is so powerful because if the Catholic Church can have trans and it's relating to the body and blood of Christ, seems like we don't have a big problem with things moving from one place to the next. So
I get where you're coming from, and thank you for sharing that. That was my first time ever hearing that. But yeah, I think transness in itself is spiritual. I'm still learning more about that. The spirituality aspect and how that plays a role in my gender identity. But yeah, it was a shift from going from one gender to the one that I felt more aligned with, because I always felt more aligned with the masculine spectrum, the male spectrum. That's how I've always viewed life, through that lens.
And what would you say is the difference between a trans person and somebody who just likes to cross dress? So for example, a drag queen, somebody who does it for performance, somebody who identifies as male, but they just like to wear female clothing. What would be a difference, would you say, between those two things?
Well, to start here, so before I transitioned, it was required. So back then in my 20s, before I actually started medically transitioning, you had to carry a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So gender dysphoria is when you have a distress, when you are so stressed and uncomfortable in your body that you don't align with the gender or the sex that you were assigned with at birth. That's the diagnoses that they give you in order to take the next step into transitioning, whether it's going to be medical or social. So that's the difference. It carries a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, which is the distress and disconnect with the sex you were assigned at birth. Drag queen, like you said, it's a performance. It's something you can take on and take off. Being trans, I don't take this off. This is who I am 24/7, 7 days a week. It's not a performance.
And I think that's so important for people to understand. There are many ways that people express themselves externally. Like you said, cross-dresser, one who likes to dress it in this way just because it makes them feel in touch with their feminine side, whatever the case is, or like we said, a drag queen. But there's a difference between like external expression and internal identity.
Yes.
And so, oh gosh, man, I wish that more people really understood that. It's one of the differences, honestly, between well, I think I won't say one of the differences. It kind of highlights one of the differences, even between sexual orientation, like a gay person, and gender identity, because every human being has both a sexual orientation and a gender identity, because they are not the same thing. I remember when I first came out, my mother thought that I wanted to become a woman. I was like, no, they're not the same thing, and it's, I don't, blame her. People don't know because we don't talk about it. So as a trans man, you're a trans man, but you also have a sexual orientation. Now, you mentioned that you are married, and you're married to a woman, right?
Yes, I'm married to a woman. Yes.
So then, do you identify as a heterosexual male? Heterosexual man?
I'm a trans man who is married to a woman. Now, let me just explain.
Okay.
Let me explain this, because she is still attracted to women. And we don't do the whole label thing. We've grown in that aspect of our journeys. So I'm more so married to my wife, but my preference is still women. But that's also a misconception, when trans men often transition from female to male and then they start dating men. Well, like you said, there's a difference between identity and sexual orientation. Trans men who date men are now considered gay men, because the sexual attraction and identity are two different things.
They absolutely are. They absolutely are. And I think that's where we get that well, they call it now, it's like a combination of cisgender and heterosexual. So they call it cishet, which is supposed to be said. We're two different things we're talking about: cisgender and also heterosexual. So sexual orientation, gender identity. So I just wanted to and thank you so much for clarifying that, because I wanted to make sure that as people are listening, that they're actually understanding the conversation that we're having, because we're all speaking the same language, right?
Yeah. And I'm still learning too. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm still learning language. I'll be 43 years old. So the language then, when I first started my journey, was different than now.
Indeed.
People were still using the term as sex change or transsexual. Now we use gender affirming care. We use transgender care. So language and things have constantly evolved, and so I'm still learning myself.
Indeed. And hopefully we can all just be lifelong learners. There's always more to know, always more to learn.
Yes, absolutely. I'm continuously, a student of life. I don't know it all. I don't try to say I know it all, and I'm open. I'm open to learning.
And so on before we dig in, on the point of lifelong learning, I just want to point out that lifelong learning means also being able to displace what you previously believed once you come into new information. Because a lot of times, even in the LGBT community, it's like, if it's the way we talked about it, it's the way we did it all, that's how I did it all my life. But as we evolve and grow and learn, it's okay to, like you said, language has evolved. It's okay to say that doesn't work anymore. Hermaphrodite doesn't work anymore, referring to an intersex person. It's okay to evolve my language. Well, that's what we always call, I don't care. It's like growth and evolution are good things. And I wonder why and again, it's not like a heterosexual problem. It's like a human problem that we don't necessarily like growing and evolving in our thinking.
It's uncomfortable. And I think a lot of it has to do with being right or wrong. We don't want to be right. We want to be right. We don't want to be wrong. And we don't want to be judged, when we figure out like, okay, maybe this isn't right. I think it has a lot to do with that. And just around the shame and guilt we're made to feel when we choose a different path or go a different direction, and not cling on to those beliefs that we were basically forced on us. We didn't have a choice in what we were, made to believe growing up.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully we can be people who lead the way, even as LGBTQ plus people who lead the way to a better way of addressing change and evolution and growth. So
I believe we are, just by starting this conversation and having this conversation. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, so take us back to the beginning. So what was it like for you in your journey, coming, first of all, to just be aware of, and also to understand, because you can be aware of certain feelings that you may have, but not really understand it or not have the language for it. So what was your journey like, just coming to be aware of and then coming to understand what you were feeling about this body that you were born in?
Well, for me, it was a combination of being aware but not understanding, and then also not having a language.
Yeah.
So I'm a 1980s baby, born in 1982. So language was definitely different then and now. My earliest reflections was around 5 years old, 1987 to be exact. This was when LL Cool J was in the game. I Need Love. That was a huge hit, and here I am reciting this song word for word to one of my crushes, who happened to be a girl at the time. But again, like I shared before, I always looked through the lens of I'm a boy. There was no there was no question about it. I wasn't confused. It was the people around me. You know, I
Wow.
was clear as day as who I was. And then at the age of 6, I got a hold of a pair of scissors, and I cut my ponytail off. I mean, I just knew I didn't identify with anything girly. I didn't want girl toys. I hated the dresses, the ruffled socks, the patent leather shoes my mom would force me to wear. I even hated how she would force me to go to church, because even growing up in church, it was just so confusing because I would always leave depressed, anxious, and sad, and just trying to figure out, okay, now that the realization has set in that I'm not a boy, but I'm a girl, but I'm attracted to girls now. So what is this going on? So that's pretty much how the journey was. And then coming out to my mom later on in life at 18, wasn't met with any support. I actually got the heaven and hell conversation. She was fearful that my soul was going to go to hell, so she was determined to not let that happen. And at that time, it was hurtful. I didn't understand it. But now that I look back, I realize her belief system played a big part in her lack of support. But from 5 years old to now, I always knew. I didn't know how I was going to transition, what it was going to look like, but I knew that I would eventually take that step.
How it has and please feel free not to answer this or any other question that may probe too deeply, but how
Okay.
has your mother's journey been like these last 30 years?
She's still in that place. She's not so much more, heaven and hell talk. We don't have those conversations. Um, I've always been the person that I'm going to do what I want to do with or without permission. But I still held on to that belief, unfortunately, for 18 years until I transitioned and decided to let it all go. So where she's at now is she loves me regardless, as she says. You're my child, I'm gonna always love you, but we share different beliefs, and that's okay. She's entitled to her beliefs, I respect it, but I'm at this point now in my journey where I don't need her permission or anyone else's permission to live my life. And that's pretty much the page we're on. I respect her and where she's at in her journey, and she respects me where I'm at in mine.
And I think that that's so powerful, and unfortunately, I so unpopular nowadays, and understandably, I understand why, but it's
Yeah.
it's powerful what you said about she's entitled to her beliefs.
Hmm.
And I think that so often, because we have been hurt and harmed
Yeah.
by the beliefs that people have had, we and I totally understand us having a wall up and having a certain hostility
Yeah.
toward those types of belief because of the harm that they've caused. But at the end of the day, we can't force people
Yeah.
to
You
be
can't.
to affirm us as gay people, as trans people, as whatever letter we pick out of that alphabet. We can't force people to see and affirm that. And yet what you said was powerful. But I respect her, she respects me.
Hmm. Yeah. But it took a while to get there. Believe me, on my end, I would say not so much on her end, because again, she grew up in a time where she didn't express her emotions.
Yeah,
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 that whole thing. So it was more so me. I had a lot of resentment and a lot of anger, and I was just like, why can't you just accept me for me? Why can't you just respect my pronouns? Why can't you just call me this, call me your son? But then I just had to get to that point where I had to affirm myself, and I had to validate me, and I had to start loving me. Um, because if I waited for her to do that, that may have never came. And then here I am on my deathbed, still trying to get my mom's approval and her to see me as I see myself. So I just started seeing myself, and just let that part go. It was hard at first. It was a struggle, but I'm glad I made that decision, and I'm not in that space anymore.
it's so much in there that I want to talk about, but I'm a preacher, and so I don't want to like pontificate, but it's like it's so much in there I want to just like flesh out because it's so powerful. So let
Whatever
me
you
just hone
feel.
in on one thing.
All right, do whatever you feel.
Yes, so you mentioned loving yourself and not
Yeah.
waiting on somebody else to love you, to love yourself. And I think about how often we don't let ourselves love ourselves because we think that we need the approval of somebody else by means of their love
Yeah.
in order for us to love and even their love the way we want it to look. Because sometimes they love us, but it's not looking the way we want it to look.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
before we're able to love ourselves, what can you say, I guess, in terms of your own journey, and maybe you can help somebody who's watching about how important it is that, like you said, as hard as it is,
Yeah.
people oftentimes dismiss something by saying, well, it's easier said than done. Hey, you're right, it is, but it doesn't change the fact you got to do it. Right. So
Oh,
what
it's
would you
work.
say to somebody about that journey of loving yourself?
It's a lot of work involved. It was a lot of tears, a lot of pain, a lot of releasing the old in order to allow the new to come in. I have to really give a shout out to my therapist because I went back to therapy also when I started transitioning. So mental and emotional support was huge for me. So I have to give a shout out to therapy for one, and then life coaching. I invested in a life coach myself. And so around that's when I started to understand my own values and my own beliefs. And so that helped me work towards to loving myself. Like being able to know my own values and what was priority for me helped me not only navigate the love I have for myself, but also navigate other relationships. So now I'm able to assess whether a relationship is good or bad, or I'm able to recognize the red flags sooner than later. I did a lot of works around my belief systems and things like that. And so I also addressed my thinking. So it was a full transformation for me. It wasn't just a physical transformation or introducing testosterone or going through the changes that you see outwardly. I did a lot of work inwardly, which
Mm.
involved forgiving my parents and letting go of the past and forgiving myself and just letting everything go so that like I said, so that I can be receptive to newness.
And that's such a universal message, because it's like you can be gay, you can be trans, you can be straight, you can
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
cis.
Yeah.
Learning to love yourself, needing to let go of the need for other people to see you, and that is a universal
Yeah, it is.
message.
And you're right. And that's what my message is truly all about. Behind Be You Do You, it's universal. Like we all want and strive to be our authentic selves. We all want to do things that bring us fulfillment and joy and peace and happiness. Doesn't matter how you identify. We all want the same thing
Yes.
at the end of the day.
It boils down to just us having this common humanity. And unfortunately, I think that so many people miss that. It's like you're getting so caught up in the weeds of trying to define and understand something that's not even your experience, that you're forgetting this is a human doggone being. This is a human being. And when you filter all the other stuff away, they're a human being who deserves, just by the virtue of that simple fact alone, to be loved and respected. It's like, can we just start right there?
Yeah. And I get it. It's challenging because again, it's challenging our belief systems. It's making us question everything that we thought we knew, and it is scary. It is scary to evolve and grow. But if you're not growing, the saying says you're dying, and you literally are dying, and you're missing out on a lot of experiences and
Yes.
a lot of great experiences and connections with people and blessings. I think that that's my thought about it.
So let's dig into blessings. So you mentioned earlier that you were raised in the church, that you would come home depressed. What has your faith journey been like, and how has your experience of being trans and going through those experiences shaped your faith?
Um,
Uh-oh, did we lose him?
you still there?
Oh, you're back now. You're back.
See, right when we get to talking about faith, look what happened.
See what I'm saying?
As weird as this may sound, and I don't know if you can relate, but I feel like my transition drew me closer to source and divine. Um, it drew me closer. I reconnected because I started to realize who I actually am versus what church was trying to tell me. And so, like I said, when I got involved in personal development and hired a life coach, that was one of the things we worked around too, was my faith and my anger that I had towards church and church hurt. And that was something that I also released. And then I realized that I could believe whatever I wanted to believe. And that was when the light bulb came on and I started my own faith journey. I started, getting into like different practices like Buddhism, things of that nature, but it always came back to the foundation. So I still believe in some of the foundation, but I'm also open to all other practices as well. Like, I don't believe what I used to believe, especially the heaven and hell talk. I believe that's a fear tactic. That's a way to control me and manipulate me and to get me to feel like I have to earn some type of reward. I don't believe the same things. And so it's definitely been a rewarding journey, I would have to say. But I feel like God is everywhere. God is present. God is me. God is in me. It actually drew me closer. My transition did.
I love that because it's like one of the things I often say is how if we love God or we're worshiping God or whatever the case, serve God, whatever language we would use, if it's not the real you doing it, then but this character you're portraying, then how real is that? And so the first part of it is you got to be you.
Yeah, I get to be me, all while loving God, and I don't have to choose. I don't have to choose my transness. I don't have to choose anything. Like, I can be and do all. I don't have to choose like I thought I had to choose. I thought I had to, get baptized in the water and wash it all away, That's silly now that I think about it. But yeah, I realized I didn't have to choose.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. So, of course, I'm sure most of the people watching, even his heterosexual cisgender people, recognize how difficult a wrestling match that could be in relation to not just the self by itself, but then combining that, adding that layer of faith on top of that. And yet I think that there's another component that often gets overlooked. And I think that it's somewhat unique to the trans experience, even outside of all the other, the L, the G, the B, that it's quite unique to the trans experience. So I want to just like lift this up and just see what your experience with this has been. Okay. As an LGBTQ plus person, and we say person like, it's a whole community. We're not all of those things. It's a community. But as a member of that community, what has your experience been like in terms of how you have been received, how you have been respected, how you have been celebrated by other LGBT people? What has that been like for you?
That's a good question. I've been received quite well. As a matter of fact, I was able to get connected to a trans man cohort that connected me to other Black transgender men. I graduated from that cohort last year. So it actually, being who I am and being my authentic self actually opened up more opportunities and got me connected with community. I haven't had so many of the experience that I've heard other individuals have. I haven't experienced so much of that. More of my challenges came from the workplace, before I transitioned, and then when I transitioned. More so, my experiences have been isolated incidences with strangers. I do have, family members that have different belief systems or whatnot, but they're never disrespectful towards me in any kind of way. It's like, again, I respect their journey, they respect mine. So as far as community, so far I've had, it's been receptive. I haven't had some of the same experiences as other people have.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. You're really blessed in that regard. So you mentioned these other experiences. What are some of the other experiences that you may have heard about in terms of what trans people have been experiencing from other LGBT or LGB people?
I hear that there's a lot of transphobia, not just from the L and the G, but there's transphobia within the trans community,
Oh wow.
which is interesting. There's a lot of misunderstanding of, trans masculine folks, and how they identify. There's a lot of back and forth with the lesbians and trans men, because a lot of transgender men's stories are they were previously lesbians. So then you have like that divide. That's what I've heard. I haven't experienced it. I do notice the energy sometimes, within community and the fight, but I really don't understand the fight for labels and the fight for this and the fight for that. I'm all for just letting people live and let live. I really don't get it, but that's not been my experience, so I can't really speak on it. But I also think it's the way that I also show up too, and just my energy, my outlook. If a situation's not fitting for me, I know how to exit. I know how to set my boundaries. I know how to speak up and advocate for myself. So I haven't had those experiences.
That's really great. And I think it's
I hope I answered that correctly.
oh yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. I was thinking about that word evolution and evolving, and how you talked about how a lot of times there have been the situations where a person starts off, you know, lesbian, but then becomes a trans, or I won't say even say becomes, but you could say awakens to, realizes their transness, if you will.
Right.
And I think that's really key because, like, so as a gay man,
Yeah.
I was, when I first awakened to my orientation,
Mhm.
I convinced myself that I was bisexual. And
Mhm.
so I started out identifying as bi. When I
Mhm.
came out to, like, before I got married to my wife, my previous wife, when I told her I didn't tell her I was gay, I told her I was bi. And it wasn't that I was lying. I had convinced my own self of that, because you can deal with that a little better than just saying I'm not attracted to women, I'm gay.
Right.
So it's like it's a journey,
It
and it's a
is.
process, and we evolve even in our understanding of who we are.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really, like, important that people understand that if a person starts off, in their understanding of who they are, cisgender and lesbian,
Right.
it's not like a flip switched one day and they decided to be trans. We're all continuing to know ourselves and
Yeah.
understand ourselves and try to make sense of it. And so
Absolutely.
if we want, like, people outside of the community to give us grace, we got to be able to give it to ourselves.
Yeah, we do. We do. And I was like you too. Like I thought I was bi because I was trying to just go along to appease people around me. So, in my teens, late teens, I did date one guy. But it was just so awkward to me. It just didn't fit. I felt like he was one of the guys, and we dressed the same, we looked the same. So it was just awkward to me. But then, you know, I evolved. Well, not evolved, but I came out as lesbian because that was the closest that I had to identify with what I was experiencing.
Yeah.
But I never aligned with being a lesbian. And so, as language evolved, and I started seeking support, that was when, I transitioned in 2018.
That's great. I love your story, because I think there's so many people can relate to it, and even like you said, the ongoing, you might call it progressive, uh, understanding of oneself, that
Yeah.
I'm learning myself as I go along, and so I got to give myself grace, you
You
know,
do. Yeah.
and give
Yeah.
other people grace, and like even like our parents or our community members, even church, whatever the case is, that they need grace too, because think about it. If we have a journey of
Yeah.
coming to understand ourselves, and we have a vested interest
Mhm.
in understanding ourselves because it's us,
Yeah.
how much more then might it be a struggle for those who don't have that experience. And so even though I think, yeah, there are times that things can be hurtful and we always need to protect ourselves, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, while we're doing that, to also offer grace to people who themselves are evolving in their understanding.
Yeah.
And maybe we can be there to help answer questions or, share our own journey to that point that we have, that we can share. Have you done any work in terms of having conversations with other parents or other straight people who are wrestling and trying to understand and grapple with it?
Oh yeah, I've had numerous conversations. I also offer a peer support one-on-one with LGBTQ and parents of LGBTQ folks. So I have a lot of conversations around it. Sometimes it does get exhausting, but like I said, I'm here. This is my purpose, and as long as I can help one person, one parent, that's all that matters to me. This my story is not just for me. It's for anyone else who looks like me or has some similar challenges or just trying to figure this out, because even I can even say, be honest and transparent, it confused the hell out of me, wrestling with, okay, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, but I'm attracted to girls, but I don't feel aligned with being a woman. I don't feel aligned with being a lesbian. So what is it,
Yeah.
And that was a lonely journey in itself, from 18 to pretty much 36. Like I left home at 22 and started seeking support on my own to try to put the pieces of the puzzle together, to try to figure out, what was happening on the inside internally. So I get it. I get it. I get when people are curious and don't understand. But there's definitely a way to go about it. I'm a firm believer. You can be respectful. You could be curious and respectful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And like we said, it's like you're not obligated to help somebody out, or because at the end of the day, they got to figure this thing out, right?
Yeah.
But if you're in a place where you can, like you said, you never know how that might help somebody else's life down the road that other person may come into contact with, that you've spared them some anguish because it would help open somebody else's eyes. That's really powerful.
If I could just help one person, again, I did my job. I fulfilled my purpose. Because again, this journey is not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. You got to really know why you're doing it to begin with. There's, I don't know if you hear in the media, but you hear on social media that people transitioned and detransition and, they go through all these different phases and journeys. So, a lot of it, even if you're not trans, you just got to know why you're doing something in life. Is it to get validation from outside, or is it something you truly want? And this is something I knew at a very young age.
And I think so. Oh my gosh, so that's a wonderful thing that you brought up about people who transition and then detransition, because the conservatives love to like pinpoint and hone in. First of all, there's very few, but they still hone in on those particular stories because it serves their agenda. And yet we have to realize LGBTQ plus is a community, which means it also involves people who are in different stages of their journey, who are going through and working through their issues in different ways. Everybody's journey isn't going to look alike, but somebody detransitioning doesn't delegitimize somebody's transition.
No. And then even when someone detransition, it doesn't take away them trying to figure out who they are either.
Yes.
That's something that we need to understand too. Like everyone's journey is unique. Just because someone detransition doesn't mean they're confused. And just like someone transitions doesn't mean they're confused either. It's all a part of an evolving process and people trying to figure out who they are. And if we respected that and made room and celebrated, people's journey more instead of making it something shameful or a taboo, and we talked more openly about it, people wouldn't be so afraid and they wouldn't suppress how they felt. And this is in church included. You have a lot of people suppressing who they are, even non-LGBTQ folks. You have straight people suppressing who they are, even if it's not involving their gender or identity. They're just going along with, well, I gotta marry a man, I gotta live, take care of the kids, and they're miserable, So I just wish everybody could just live their life,
Absolutely. We have a question here, and I want to certainly encourage anyone who has any questions, please feel free to ask, as we often do. If you're not camera shy, you want to come on camera to ask your question, you can do that as well. As always, this will be a respectful conversation, but feel free to go to talk.faith evolution. I have to shift from my church streams to the podcast stream. So talk.faith-evolution.show if you would like to ask your question in person. But we have a couple of questions actually. So the first one, let's go ahead and put the first one on screen. So is someone transgender if they identify as non-binary? Although you are okay with your sexual organ. So if they identify as non-binary, are they transgender?
So I'm learning. I believe non-binary is when the person doesn't identify as either. And so you do have some that are trans non-binary.
Okay.
I'm learning.
I think that, again, we're both learning, right? Because I'm not trans, so please correct me if I'm wrong. That yeah. I think does that fit the term gender queer?
So non-binary people basically may identify as a mix of both genders. Okay. Or they may not entirely shift to one or either.
Okay.
And specifically, most go by they, them. They don't use he, she pronouns.
Okay. And I think that's a good question because it shows how we're all right, trying to understand and trying to make sense of and trying to find language and sometimes labels can be hurtful or limiting. Sometimes they can just be explanatory and help people to wrap their mind around something. So
yes.
Go ahead.
I'm glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that because that's how I am like when I share my story. Because like I said, I didn't have the language. And so in my time, it was either you're gay, lesbian, bi, trans. It was female to male. You wanted to transition to a male, which means you wanted to do the social transition and medical transition. Right? It wasn't non-binary didn't exist then. So again, this shows you the evolving of gender identity and self-expression. So again, I'm not going to say I know all of the terminology and language. I just know my experience and I can't speak for other people, but like you said, it's more so to explain who someone is than what they might actually identify as, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And it's also important why we put that plus on the end of our, we say LGBTQ plus or LGBTQIA plus, because there are so many different ways of identifying and so many different ways of expressing that we can't necessarily encompass them all. And so rather than trying, we give out some majors and then just put the plus sign, which is intended to still provide some degree of inclusivity to all of those parts of the community that we may not have necessarily labeled, if you will, or given a name or a letter to in that acronym. So, all right. So we have another question here, and thank you all for your questions. These are great questions. So another question: have you ever had a moment that you wanted to change your mind?
Oh, absolutely not. No. Like I said, from a very young age, I prayed to be a boy. I knew it would happen. At one point, I wish I would have done it sooner, but I didn't have the support systems in place and I wasn't financially, emotionally, or even mentally prepared. And so I feel like it happened at the right time. But no, I've never thought about changing my mind.
So you mentioned you talked about a financial, emotional, having a support system in place. And then you said you feel like it happened at the right time. Yeah. So that even if you are trans, there's still some, what would you call it? Prep work or something that can be done to help you to do this, I guess, successfully. I may not be phrasing this the best way, but
the way I describe it is I feel like my entire 20s was me gathering information. It was the information stage. It was prepping me for this moment. So like I said, I moved out at 22. Got into a long-term relationship with someone. At 22, I also ended up being a co-parent. So I'm navigating all these different lanes in my life, trying to figure out if I'm gonna go back to school, trying to figure out what kind of job I'm gonna have. And again, I'm co-parenting at the age of 22. Mind you, I didn't know what it meant to be like a parent to a kid. I'm still a kid myself. So I feel like a lot of my 20s was a learning phase.
Yeah.
It was full of challenges. Financially, I didn't have the money to transition. I kept running into hurdles after hurdle after hurdle, trying to navigate, the mental health system, go to therapy, try to figure out, that aspect of it. And then fast forward, it just so happens in 2015, I was hired by one of the biggest healthcare organizations out there. And the same therapist I had in my 20s happened to be the same therapist I would have fast forward.
Oh, wow.
So this is why I feel like a lot of this was a divine timing and at the right moment. Because who would have known I would have had the same therapist leading up to my transition? And I was able to, I didn't have to pay for the procedures at this point. Mind you, before it would have costed me tens and thousands of dollars. So fast forward, I get hired with this company, I start transitioning, and I have all of my support systems in place. I'm in, a healthy relationship. At the time, my wife and I weren't married yet, but I'm in a healthy relationship. I'm working on my mental health, my emotional health before I even transition. So yeah, I feel like it was prepping me for this moment.
Do you personally know any trans people who have decided not to undertake any medical procedures or medical interventions regarding being trans and what that's like for them?
I know a few non-binary folks. I know a lot of trans masculine folks that don't opt to have bottom surgery, but they do have top surgery or they do start hormones. Every individual's journey is unique to them and their experience and what they want and what it means to identify, as a trans man or trans masculine man, however they identify. For me, through my lens, I always started with top to bottom. So in my mind's eye, it was, I wanted top surgery. I wanted to start hormones. And eventually I will go on to have the more extensive surgery, which is bottom surgery.
And I think that's key for people to understand is that, like you said, everybody's journey looks differently. Yeah. And just because somebody is trans doesn't mean that their journey looks like somebody else's. Right. They may have taken hormones. They may not have. They may have had surgery. They may not have. We have to expand our minds about what being trans, what being gay, what being anything can look like. Because even though we may apply labels to help people to wrap their mind around something, these are not supposed to be intended as boxes. No. That cause everybody to look the same and have the same experience. So I'm very glad that you brought up that because it helps to demonstrate that we're the same, but we're all different.
Yeah, and I had to check myself too because I found myself judging other trans masculine folks as well. I'm like, what do you mean you want to transition, but you don't want to, go full on? So I had to check my own biases and judgment around, other people's experiences too.
That's powerful. That's powerful. Yeah. And I think that speaks to how I was talking about earlier about how even within the community, we have had some challenges in relation to understanding and respecting one another's stories and journeys. So
yeah, it happens. It happens to us all.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a trans thing as much as it's just a human. It's a human thing.
Yeah.
We all do it, regardless of how we identify.
Indeed. We have another question here. Let's see. Has there been a moment that this transformation was too much to handle?
I would say in the beginning when I started testosterone, unfortunately, there's not a lot of data and research out there that's going to tell someone what they're going to experience and go through. But I did have a lot of highs and lows, but that was because it takes time for the testosterone to settle in your body. So if you're not familiar with the hormone process, so being born a woman, you have primarily estrogen. You have a little bit of testosterone in you, but then when you're introducing testosterone into your body, your body is shifting, is changing. So for me, I can only speak for myself. I did experience some mood fluctuations, my hunger increased, I gained weight. So those were like moments where I was like, oh my God, what did I what did I get myself into? But I kind of describe it, the best way that I could describe it was like it was my cocooning phase.
Mm.
You know, like I had to go through that transformation, that breakdown, that uncomfortable breakdown. It was uncomfortable, but I got through it. So that was probably, I would say, the only moment where, yeah, I wanted to just go to sleep. But wait, not take myself out, but I was just like, I'm over it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine that, because this is not like, this is not like changing your hair color, right?
No.
This is a major shift.
This requires a lot of patience, a lot of self-care, being kind to myself, speaking kindly to myself, not comparing my journey to, everyone else's journey. I had a very, supportive team, an endocrinologist that monitored my testosterone. So I wasn't going through it by myself. And then I also had my, my wife for support and other close friends and family. So I wasn't going through it by myself, but it was a roller coaster. Yeah. But I made it out on the other end.
But you made it out on the other end.
I did, yeah.
The power of going through is coming out, knowing that there's another end to come out of.
And I've learned that throughout my journey. Yeah.
Absolutely. I have a question that, so this gets somewhat political. And as I said earlier, I gave a disclaimer. Feel free not to answer anything. But
let me sip water.
Right. Yeah. Take a sip. But I think that this is the moment that we're in. And I think that it's important for us to the extent that we're able to speak to those moments, especially as members of these communities, and particularly as a trans person who's being targeted, honed in on specifically by the current political atmosphere. And so we know with the current administration and the whole MAGA mentality and that trans people have really been made the boogeyman of the hour. They always want to have somebody to go after. Always want to have somebody to help garner people's anger and frustration, because it makes them open their wallets and give. It makes them go out to the poll and vote. And so unfortunately, trans people really have been in this season the target of this administration. One of the it's multiple. There's a bathroom controversy, but one of the controversies has been regarding sports.
Yeah,
and it's particularly the inclusion of trans men. The inclusion of trans women in female sports. Now, before I ask this question, it's very important that I point out the fact that you are Sam. And I'm not saying this to you because you know you're Sam, but I'm saying it to everybody who's listening. Sam is an individual, right? Yeah. Sam doesn't speak for every trans person. Romeo doesn't speak for every gay person. Right. We have our own individual worldviews and points of views and perspectives and experiences that have helped us shape how we live and how we exist in the world. And so I sometimes, I think, it's easy to get irritated when people ask me a question like, you ask me a question about being gay, like I speak for every gay person. So I don't want to do that to you regarding the trans experience, but just as a trans person who does have, a lived experience, what is your perspective on that controversy, particularly the one about sports?
I really think that we should be focusing on other things, but because like you said, we're always the target in this political climate. But my take on the whole sports thing is I would love to see transgender individuals have their own spaces. Why not? If we're not invited, why don't we just create our own? Everything else it's made up and created. So why can't we just create our own space, and learn how to get along with each other first? And then that way we can get along with everybody else. Let's focus on, building and empowering our own community first. I don't see an issue with having our own sports arena, but then I'll also say that I feel like this argument is tiresome if people really understood biology. So whenever a man transitions to a female and they're on estrogen, they're not going to be stronger than, the average woman, if that's what their argument. There's no advantage. So for me, I'm a trans man, I'm on testosterone, but I'm not the strongest guy in the room. I'm stronger than some guys, and vice versa. So I think that argument is old, and they really need to come up with something else.
They will. They'll move on. Like remember back when first, of course, it was the gays, right? And gay marriage was the big thing to get everybody to the polls, and then all of a sudden it got struck down. The bans got struck down by the Supreme Court, and same-sex marriage has been legal everywhere. And all of a sudden, we don't hear anything else about gay people. Now it's all trans. They're gonna always find a boogeyman. So trans people just keep holding on. They're gonna move on to something.
I mean, eventually, but again, transgender individuals. We've been we've existed for a long time. Absolutely. I mean, in other cultures, we're celebrated. We're seen as holy. In the Hindu culture, in the Native American culture, like we've been here since the beginning of time. So I'm not really sure why people are so confused now and feeling like, oh my God, trans people are taking over the world. We're literally 1%. And the only reason why you probably see more of us is because now we're not afraid, we're being who we want to be and we're speaking up. But we've been here. We're your neighbor, we're your brother, your sister, your aunt, your uncle, your pastors.
Absolutely.
We're everywhere. We're your coworkers. So we just want to be treated with dignity and respect like we all do. That's all we want. And I don't pay trans bills. I don't pay trans taxes. I don't drive a trans car. Although I wish I did get some kind of special tax, but I got goals, dreams, and aspirations just like everyone else.
Awesome. Absolutely. Yeah. So as we wrap up, and again, anybody else who has any questions, feel free to ask. I mentioned earlier about okay, so there was something that I wanted to say that you mentioned just a second ago, and just that fast it escaped me. So right now I'm trying to stall because I want to try to remember what it was that I wanted to ask you, or is it something? Anyway, so but in the meantime, let me certainly give you an opportunity to let people know how to follow your work, to get connected with your podcast. You say you provide life coaching help and the work that you do with mental health. So how can people connect with you?
Well, currently I took a hiatus from social media just to focus on being more present in my life and with family. I'm preparing to go back to school in August, so I'm just trying to mentally prepare for that. But if you want to connect, I'm old school. I love to hop on a Zoom and see your face. You can reach out to me at BUDoYouCoaching.com. That's the best way to get in contact with me for right now.
Awesome. BUDoYouCoaching.com. Y'all go look it up and connect, because these are wonderful, wonderful, and very important resources, because there are even fewer resources for trans people than there are for gay people. And so let's make sure that we support those resources and help to make them much more prevalent around social media and around the world. Yeah. I did remember what I wanted to say. Praise the Lord. Right. So it was about this idea of this, the gay agenda, right? And how they talk about how like our intent that we're turning people gay and we're turning people trans, because we've never seen this many gay people, we've never seen this many trans people until they started teaching it in the schools, until they started putting it on these TV shows. And my thing is, I'm like, I don't think that there are more gay people. I don't think that there are more trans people. What there are more people who already have been trans and gay, who have now been given the space and the like social permission to actually explore that part of themselves that in previous generations had to be suppressed, and to possibly even own it publicly without having to hide. What we have is less hiding, not more gays and trans. And so the world has been evolving. So you've mentioned about how language has changed and evolved over the last 40 years. How has your experience as a trans person evolved?
Ooh, that's a good question. What do you mean, like in a like social or?
Right, exactly. In terms of the society and the world, and yeah.
I'm now a black man in America. Okay, let's start there. You know, I hear a lot of talking points around privilege. Um, I won't say I don't experience privilege in the way people would think. So, for example, I've had the privilege to, growing up, I had the privilege of going to private school. Also, I've had the privilege to, get higher education and things of that nature. I've had the privilege of having like, my transition care taken care of. So in that aspect, okay, yeah, I've had privilege in certain aspects, but I won't say that like I have more now that I'm a man of trans experience. Um, as a matter of fact, I feel like there's still sometimes I think I put a lot of pressure on myself to sometimes walk this earth. How can I articulate this? Sometimes I struggle sometimes with what it means to be a man. Sometimes I don't want to be too emotional or express myself because then I'm feeling like, oh, I'm being too feminine, or if that makes sense. So I'm still trying to navigate what it means to be a man, for me. Like, for example, pre-transition, I wouldn't paint my nails. I wouldn't put nothing on my nails. But when I transitioned, I started exploring, those avenues. So it's just been a learning journey. What I like, what I don't like. If I like it, I like it. If I don't, I don't. I'm more so of like, I'm not here to help people understand anymore. I'm just here to preach a message to be you, do you unapologetically. Like, that's my message now. I used to be so caught up in trying to get people to understand, why I'm trans and why I want to live my life as a man, this, that, and another. But I'm not in that space anymore. You know,
And you mentioned, oh, go ahead.
I'm just Sam. I'm just Sam. That's the best way I could put it. I'm just Sam. I'm testing the waters, everywhere I go.
Awesome, awesome. You mentioned very early in the conversation about how it also is about how you show up.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times what we get back from people, like even like particularly like from my experience, even like family members, a lot of times what we get back has a lot to do with how we show up. And there some people know like I may disagree, but that's not a button I'm gonna push today, right?
Right.
So how we show up and showing up starts off with before we get to the up part, right? We have to actually know ourselves and love ourselves and celebrate ourselves, because that's going to impact how you come into a space. And when you come into that space, what people are picking up on and what they know they can't take you, because you come into that space with a certain sense of self that can't be shaken by their ignorance. You want to say more about that?
Well, you answered it perfectly. Like, you articulated, you said what I was trying to say. So basically, when I go into a space, I'm confident in who I am. I'm aware of who I am. Like, I have a friend that I connected with. She's a trans woman. She's in her 60s now, and she transitioned later on in life. And she talks about being born transgender. And she says a lot of times when trans individuals go into these spaces, we're too much in our head of what people are thinking. When 9 times out of 10, people don't know. A lot of times people don't even know. Like, no one knows unless I tell people now. So all of these issues that come up with the bathroom, I don't have an issue using the bathroom. I don't have an issue navigating this world. Like I said, most of my situations have been just that, situational. So I don't leave my house in fear like the media would have you think. I'm really happy over here. I'm content. I'm at peace, Like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on outside, but I control what happens here in this body, in this house. So,
My.
Yeah.
That's great. I hope I didn't cut you off, because that was wonderful. Like, I control what happens here.
Yeah.
We need to get them on a t-shirt or something. Because it's like the autonomy. See, so we rightly fight for the right of the autonomy of our bodies. I believe in the sovereignty of the individual, right? The autonomy of our body. But part of that being autonomous is owning and taking responsibility. You said it was yours. So now you own that thing. Now you take responsibility for how I treat this body, for what I think about this body, for how I exist in this body, and how I show up with this body into the other spaces, whether or not they acknowledge this body. I'm still owning who I am because I'm autonomous. Oh man, that'll preach. I need to preach that sermon.
That's your next sermon. Yeah.
Right.
Let me know so I can tune in. No, that was good. Yeah, that's exactly what I've been trying to articulate. Yeah, I'm just me in all spaces. Take it or leave it.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think this has been such a rich conversation. And I said it at when we first started, but I just want to say it again. Thank you so much for your willingness to come on and to share, because like we said, there's no obligation on anybody's part. It's like, I've done that work. I've had those conversations. I'm done. And all we can say is okay and respect that. But for you just being willing to still come out and just have that discussion, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm glad I showed up, because sometimes I get in those spaces where I'm tired of educating folks, but this was a rich conversation, and your guests tuning in were very welcoming, I appreciate that.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I'm very glad that they were too, because I wouldn't want them to embarrass. But y'all come on my podcast embarrassing me, got me bringing on guests, and y'all acting a fool. No, I'm kidding.
Hey, I know how to curse too. Don't be
Absolutely.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Absolutely. I appreciate you as well. Sam Castle, thank you so much for coming on. I encourage you all, as you watch this, whether you're watching live or want to watch later, feel free to like, feel free to comment later, feel free to share. As I said earlier, it's so important that these types of conversations, especially amongst for trans people, because they're being particularly targeted in this moment, and there are so many people who may be suffering in silence. So this is an opportunity for them to hear someone's story from their own experience, from their own trans journey, and being able to share what they've gone through and provide hope. I would hope to others to know that there is, like we said earlier, an other side to this tunnel. There is a light. There is a coming out. And so thank you for allowing this resource to exist, because you've been willing to share your story. But now the responsibility is ours to help get this story out. And then you won't have to educate people too much. You can just point them to the podcast. Go watch Faith Evolution, and you'll get all the answers you need.
It could never be too much. Like I said, this is my purpose, and I'm just going to continue walking in it. And if I could be of help to anyone, that's all that matters. So make sure you connect with me at BUDoYouCoaching.com. That's also a way to, get on my podcast as well. All Things BU Do You is at that website.
BUDoYouCoaching.com. Y'all make sure to check it out. Go check it out now so you don't forget. As soon as you're right there on your device.
Right.
BUDoYouCoaching.com. Yeah. Thanks again, Sam Castle. Listen, everybody, I challenge you, I encourage you, subscribe, like, because we are continuing to have some important conversations as we move forward. These are the real conversations that the church doesn't want to have, and unfortunately isn't having, but we're going to have them. And with your help and with your support, we'll keep on having them. So I look forward to seeing you all again. The Lord, as the old saying said, the Lord delay is coming and the creek don't rise. 1 week from tonight, 8 p.m. Central Time, right here on Faith Evolution. Love you all. Good night.
Peace.